Listen closely. Closer. There's a story the old Venetian merchants used to whisper in their counting houses, between the clink of gold coins and the scratch of quill on parchment. They spoke of a man who owned the most beautiful courtesan in all of Venice. Hair like spun moonlight, eyes that promised eternity. Every night, he'd lock her in a room lined with mirrors, convinced that if she saw her own beauty reflected infinitely, she'd never want to leave. One morning, they found him dead in that same room, surrounded by shattered glass, his hands bleeding from trying to embrace 1,000 reflections that were never really there. You see, the velvet prison isn't built by your enemies. It's woven from your own desperate fingers, thread by thread, each strand a need you couldn't bear to release. The modern man sits in his apartment, thumb scrolling through dating apps like a gambler pulling slot machine levers, each swipe a prayer to the algorithm gods. Maybe this one, maybe this time. Maybe she'll fill the void that yawns wider with each passing validation. Schopenhauer called it the hedgehog's dilemma. Creatures seeking warmth, moving closer until their quills pierce each other, then backing away into the cold, forever oscillating between loneliness and pain. But here's what the old pessimist didn't tell you. Some hedgehogs learn to generate their own heat. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. The blue light from your phone screen makes your face look corpse-like in the darkness. You're drafting another message to someone who stopped responding 3 days ago. Each word you type is another bar in your cage. Each seen notification, another lock clicking shut. The scent of stale coffee mingles with the synthetic vanilla of a candle you bought to make your place seem inviting. But inviting to whom? To the woman who'll finally see your worth? To the reflection in your bathroom mirror that stopped recognizing you months ago? A 2024 study from the Journal of Behavioral Addiction found that men who compulsively seek romantic validation show the same neurological patterns as cocaine addicts, the same dopamine desperation, the same tolerance building, the same withdrawal shakes when the supply runs dry. But cocaine, at least, is honest about what it is. There's an old Tibetan parable about a monk who spent 40 years meditating in a cave, seeking enlightenment. When he finally emerged, the villagers asked what wisdom he'd found. He laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves, and said, "I learned that the cave was never keeping me in. I was keeping myself there, terrified of what I'd become without my suffering." Do you smell that? That's the musty perfume of your own longing, fermenting in the sealed jar of your chest. Every woman you've ever texted at 2 a.m., every "I miss you" sent to someone who's already forgotten your middle name. These aren't love letters. They're ransom notes you're writing to yourself, demanding payment for a hostage that was never taken. The velvet prison feels so soft, doesn't it? Like being strangled by silk scarves, like drowning in honey. The bars are made of your own ribs, bent outward, reaching for something, anything, to complete the cathedral of your emptiness. But here's the terrible secret that Machiavelli knew, that Nietzsche danced with in his madness, that every man discovers in the mirror at 3 a.m. when the mask finally cracks. The door was never locked. You've been sitting in an open cage, wings clipped by your own desperate hands, singing the same song to an audience that left the theater years ago. The stage lights are just the flames from bridges you burned, trying to trap someone on your island. But islands, my friend, are just mountains that drown themselves trying to kiss the sky. Tell me, and be honest, because the darkness already knows. When was the last time you went a full week without checking if she watched your story? When did your worth become a notification, your value a read receipt? The man who needs nothing doesn't live in absence. He lives in presence, present to the oak tree quality of his own solitude. to the way morning light falls across an empty bed like a blessing rather than an accusation. He's learned what the Venetian merchant never could: that mirrors multiply illusions, but solitude reveals truth. And the truth? The truth tastes like black coffee at dawn, bitter and necessary, waking you to a world where you're already whole, already enough, already free. The cage dissolves the moment you stop rattling its bars. When starving becomes more familiar than satisfaction. Here's a joke for you. A man walks into a therapist's office and says, "Doctor, I'm addicted to rejection." The therapist says, "I can't help you." The man sighs with relief. "Thank God. I was worried you'd say yes." There's a species of desert flower that only blooms once every 100 years, and when it does, it releases a perfume so intoxicating that animals will abandon water sources just to die beside it. Their last breath full of that impossible sweetness. Nature, you see, has a sense of humor darker than mine. You've become that animal, haven't you? Except your flower is a woman who responds to your messages just often enough to keep you dying of thirst, one drop of attention at a time. You've developed a taste for your own starvation, learned to mistake hunger pangs for butterflies, trained yourself to interpret crumbs as feasts. In the summers of medieval Prague, there lived a clockmaker who fell in love with a duchess. Every day he'd stand beneath her window, holding increasingly elaborate timepieces he'd crafted, each one more intricate, more impossible than the last. She never looked down, not once. After 7 years, they found him dead in his workshop, surrounded by 10,000 clocks, all set to different times, all ticking out of sync. The Duchess, when told of his death, asked, "Who?" The modern version: you're crafting Instagram stories like prayer wheels, each one a desperate spell to summon her attention. Your phone has become a slot machine where the jackpot is a heart emoji from someone who wouldn't recognize your hopes if they were written in fire across the sky. You've turned yourself into a content creator for an audience of one who changed the channel 3 seasons ago. But here's where it gets interesting. Where Kierkegaard would lean forward in his grave and whisper, "Finally, someone understands." You don't actually want her to love you back. Not really. Because if she did, if she suddenly turned and offered you everything you claimed to desire, you'd realize the terrible truth. You don't know how to digest real food anymore. You've been living on famine so long that abundance would poison you. A 2025 Harvard study on attachment patterns found something delicious. Men who persistently pursue unavailable partners show increased cortisol production when presented with available ones. Their bodies literally reject accessibility. They've rewired themselves to crave the knife more than the kiss. Picture a man training for a marathon by running away from finish lines. That's you. Every time you text someone who left you on read, every time you romanticize the one who got away while ignoring the one who stayed, you're not seeking love. You're seeking the familiar ache of its absence, because absence has become your oldest friend, the only constant in a world where even your shadow leaves when the lights go out. There's a humid evening in July where you'll sit on your balcony, the air thick enough to swim through, mosquitoes writing cursive in the amber light, and you'll realize you've been in love with your own longing. The woman was just a prop, a convenient shape to pour your emptiness into. You've been having a relationship with your own wound, tonguing it like a broken tooth, addicted to the specific frequency of its ache. The Sufis have a saying, "The beloved's face is a mirror where the lover sees his own yearning." But what happens when you fall in love with the yearning itself? When the hunger becomes more real than any food could ever be? You know that painting, Saturn devouring his son? Goya painted it directly on his dining room wall. That image of the god eating his own offspring, eyes wild with a hunger that regenerates what it consumes. That's you with your desires, consuming them before they can mature into reality, keeping them perpetually infant, perpetually pure, perpetually impossible. The cigarette burns down between your fingers, forgotten. The whiskey in your glass has gone warm. Somewhere, a woman you've never met is living a complete life without knowing you exist. And this thought comforts you more than any love letter ever could. Because if she doesn't know you, she can't leave you. If she never arrives, she can never disappoint you by being human. Here's my question, and I want you to sit with it like a stone in your shoe. What would happen if you got everything you wanted? What would you chase then? Who would you be without your beautiful suffering? The man who needs nothing has made peace with his appetite. He's learned to eat when hungry, drink when thirsty, love when present, not when desperate. He's discovered that hunger isn't holy, that starvation isn't sacrifice, that dying of thirst while refusing water isn't romantic. It's just another form of suicide with better poetry. The feast was always available. You just preferred the famine because at least you knew its shape, its rules, its reliable cruelty. At least hunger never asked you to change, to grow, to become someone capable of digestion. But capability, real capability, begins the moment you stop glorifying your emptiness and start questioning why you're so terrified of being full. Where every man performs for an audience that was never watching. In the autumn of 1891, a Russian ballet dancer named Vaslav performed for an empty theater every night for 3 months. The revolution had taken his audience, but he kept dancing, kept leaping, kept bleeding through his shoes onto the stage. When they finally found him, collapsed in the orchestra pit, he was smiling. "The shadows," he whispered. The shadows applauded. "You're still dancing, aren't you? Still performing masculinity like it's a one-man show, where the script was written by dead men who never loved anything but their own reflections. Look at you, curating your life like a museum nobody asked to visit, polishing your personality like armor for a war that ended before you were born. The gym at 5 a.m. where you lift weights to become heavy enough to matter. The cologne that costs more than some families spend on food. It's bergamot and sandalwood promising to make you memorable to women who've already forgotten your name. The leather jacket that whispers dangerous while you apologize to customer service representatives and sleep with a nightlight shaped like the moon. Here's what Nietzsche understood while he was going mad, hugging that horse in Turin. We're all actors who've forgotten we're acting, so committed to our roles that we've mistaken the costume for skin. You've been method acting confident man so long that you've forgotten what your real voice sounds like. The one that breaks when nobody's listening. The one that asks the ceiling at 4 a.m. why nothing ever feels like enough. There's a Japanese concept, hona and tatamai, the true self and the facade self. But what happens when you've worn the mask so long that your face has grown to fit it? What happens when the performance becomes more real than the performer? I'll tell you what happens. You become a ghost haunting your own life. You know that feeling when you're at a party, drink in hand, surrounded by people, and suddenly you see yourself from outside, like you're floating above, watching this stranger wear your face, speak with your voice, laugh at jokes you don't understand. That's not dissociation, my friend. That's clarity. That's the moment the stage lights flicker and you realize you've been performing for mannequins, that the laughter is just a laugh track, that the whole world is a theater where everyone's acting and nobody's watching. A 2024 study on male identity performance found that men spend an average of 3.7 hours daily maintaining their public persona. That's 56 days a year, pretending to be someone you think others want you to be. 56 days of your one wild and precious life spent as an understudy in your own existence. The October wind rattles your windows like applause. Your apartment smells of coffee and that specific loneliness that comes from performing confidence while dying of doubt. You've got 47 matches on dating apps, each profile crafted to attract women you wouldn't recognize in daylight. Each bio a fiction about a man you've never been. Loves adventure. Hasn't left the city in 2 years. Passionate about life. Can't remember the last time something moved you to tears that wasn't your own reflection. Here's a secret the old shamans knew. Shadows have weight. Every false self you project creates a shadow self that feeds on your authenticity, grows fat on your compromises. You've created so many versions of yourself for so many different audiences that you're now a hall of mirrors with no original to reflect. Remember Plato's cave? Those prisoners watching shadows on the wall, thinking that's reality? You're not the prisoner, brother. You're the shadow. You're what happens when someone mistakes the projection for the person. When the performance runs so long that the actor forgets there's an exit. But here, lean in close because this is where the knife twists into something like hope. There's a beautiful terror in realizing you're performing for no one. That freedom you feel when you're completely alone, when you can finally drop the act. That's not loneliness. That's the first honest breath you've taken all day. That's your real face remembering how to move without choreography. The man who needs nothing has stopped auditioning for a role in other people's lives. He's burned the script, dismantled the stage, sent the audience home. He sits in the empty theater of his solitude, and for the first time, he's not performing. He's just existing, raw and unwitnessed, and finally, devastatingly real. So here's my challenge. And it's going to hurt. Go stand in front of a mirror tonight. Look yourself in the eyes. Really look. And tell yourself one true thing. Not something impressive, not something curated, not something you'd put in a bio. One true, pathetic, beautiful human thing. Watch how hard it is. Watch how your face wants to perform even for yourself. Watch how terrifying honesty becomes when you've been lying for so long, you've forgotten what truth tastes like. The shadows don't need your performance. They never did. They were always just the darkness cast by your own desperate light, trying to illuminate a stage that was always empty, for an audience that was always you. Stop dancing for ghosts. The music ended years ago, and the silence, that terrible, gorgeous silence, is trying to teach you something about who you are when nobody's watching, when nobody's applauding, when you're just a man, alone with his truth, discovering that authentic solitude is worth more than 1,000 performed connections. The show's over. Time to go home. Time to become real. Where we water what's already gone, hoping death might bloom backwards. Listen to this sound. That's your heart, still sending blood to a limb that was amputated years ago. The doctors call it phantom pain. Poets call it love. There's a garden in Kyoto where monks have tended the same cherry tree for 800 years. It hasn't bloomed in 3 centuries, but still they water it. Still they prune its dead branches. Still, they sweep fallen petals that exist only in their memory. When asked why, the head monk said, "We're not tending the tree, we're tending our inability to let go." You've got your own garden, don't you? That museum of dead relationships you visit every night, carefully preserving conversations from 2019. screenshots from when she still used heart emojis, voicemails you've transferred across 3 phones like holy relics. You're a curator of conclusion, an archaeologist of your own endings, brushing dust off bones and calling it intimacy. She's been gone for, what, 2 years? 3? But you still sleep on your side of the bed. Still buy that brand of oat milk she liked. Still pause Netflix at the episodes she hasn't seen, as if she might walk through the door. Apologize for being late. Curl into that specific spot where your arm meets your chest. That hollow that's been empty so long, it's developed its own ecosystem of grief. Here's what Schopenhauer would tell you if he could see you now, scrolling through her Instagram at 2 a.m., noting every new man who appears, cataloging changes in her smile. We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves to be like other people, and the remaining quarter we sacrifice to remember who we used to be with them. The rain sounds different when you're listening for footsteps that won't come. Food tastes different when you're cooking for one, but buying for 2. The whole world becomes a memorial to something that maybe never existed the way you remember it. Because memory, that beautiful liar, has been editing the footage, color-correcting the past, until even the fights seem romantic. Until even the leaving seems like foreplay for a return that exists only in the fever dream of your longing. A 2025 neuroscience study from Oxford found that men hold on to relationship memories 40% longer than women. That masculine brains literally form deeper grooves around romantic loss, like a record that skips on the same bar of the same song until the needle carves a canyon too deep to escape. You want to know something grotesque? Something that would make even Kafka laugh? You're not mourning her. You're mourning the version of yourself who believed in forevers, who thought love was a destination rather than a weather pattern. You're grieving the man who didn't know that everything ends, who hadn't yet learned that even the most beautiful things are just entropy in designer clothing. There's an old Romanian folktale about a man who loved a witch. When she left him, she cursed him to remember only their first kiss, over and over every time he closed his eyes. He spent 40 years reliving that same moment, that same taste of wild strawberries and lightning, until he couldn't tell if it was memory or madness. When he finally died, they found him smiling. The curse had become his comfort. The prison had become his home. You're living that curse voluntarily. Every time you drive past that restaurant, every time her song comes on, every time you smell lavender and lies, you're choosing to remain in that moment when she was still yours, or when you thought she was, or when you pretend ownership was the same as love. But here's the plot twist, the beautiful catastrophe that Machiavelli would appreciate. The Garden of Dead Roses isn't about her at all. It's about you being addicted to your own capacity for devotion. You're not watering dead flowers. You're watering your identity as someone who loves deeply, who stays loyal, who doesn't give up. You've confused persistence with virtue, confused suffering with depth. Let me ask you something, and don't you dare look away. If she came back tomorrow, really came back, not the idealized version you've been feeding with your grief, would you even want her? Or would you miss missing her? Would you feel empty without your emptiness? The man who needs nothing has burned his garden, not in anger, but in recognition. He's understood that tending graves isn't gardening, that visiting tombs isn't traveling, that loving ghosts isn't intimacy. It's just another way of being alone with better props. He's learned what those Kyoto monks haven't. Sometimes the most sacred act isn't tending the dead tree. It's having the courage to plant a new seed, to risk another spring, to believe that the earth isn't exhausted just because one thing failed to bloom. Your phone buzzes. It's not her. It's never her. And that's not a tragedy. that's a doorway. Every message that isn't from the past is an invitation to the present, where real women with real flaws and real beauty are living real lives, unburdened by your mythology, unaware they're competing with a ghost you've edited into divinity. The Garden of Dead Roses smells sweet, because decay always does at first. But stay there long enough, and you'll realize you're composting yourself, becoming fertilizer for something that will never grow. No matter how much of yourself you pour into that barren soil, it's time to leave the garden, time to stop mistaking rot for roses, time to discover what blooms when you stop watering the dead. Where suffering becomes your last remaining virtue. There was a man in ancient Persia who hammered a nail through his own hand every morning. When asked why, he said, "So I know I'm real." When told he could simply look in a mirror, he laughed. Mirrors show faces. Pain shows truth. Congratulations. You've become that man, except your nails are text messages to people who don't care. Job applications for positions that will devour you. Relationships you enter already knowing the exit. You've built an entire identity around your wounds. A personality from scar tissue, a philosophy from your failures. You wear your damage like designer clothing, your trauma like a Rolex that only tells time in past tense. The candle on your nightstand has burned down to nothing, wax pooling like the remnants of prayers you've forgotten the words to. It's 4:17 a.m., that specific minute when the world feels most honest, when even the darkness gets tired of pretending. Your sheets smell like the sweat of nightmares you can't quite remember. Dreams where you're always running towards something that runs faster. You've become so fluent in the language of lack that abundance sounds like a foreign tongue. You've memorized every way to say, "I'm broken," but forgotten how to pronounce, "I'm healing." Your suffering has become your resume, your pain, your only credential in a world that rewards whoever bleeds most beautifully. Here's what Marcus Aurelius didn't write in his Meditations, what he saved for the nights when even emperors feel like beggars. We choose our chains because at least chains are certain. At least chains never leave. At least chains never disappoint us by turning into wings. You know what's truly obscene? You're proud of it. Proud of how much you can endure, how much rejection you can swallow, how many times you can be broken and still function. You've turned endurance into identity, survival into personality. You're the man who boasts about working 80-hour weeks, about sleeping 4 hours a night, about how you don't need anyone, not realizing you're bragging about your own slow suicide. A 2024 Stanford study on masculine suffering found something delicious. Men who identify primarily through their struggles show activation in the same brain regions as religious ecstasy. You're literally getting high on your own crown of thorns, addicted to the rush of martyrdom, the sweet sting of self-crucifixion. There's a species of tree that only grows in forest fires, that needs destruction to germinate. You've become that tree, setting yourself ablaze just to feel yourself growing, mistaking the smell of your own burning for the incense of transformation. But here's what those trees don't tell you. They grow alone, always alone, surrounded by ash and calling it a forest. The summer humidity presses against your windows like the breath of someone who's given up trying to get in. Your coffee's gone cold again. You've trained yourself to prefer it that way because disappointment has become your comfort zone, and comfort has become your enemy. You've declared war on your own happiness, and you're winning. Kierkegaard wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." But you've gone one better. You're creating a future made entirely of pain, just so you'll have something familiar to remember. Here's the question that will crack you open if you let it. Who would you be without your suffering? Strip away the heartbreak, the rejection, the failure, the grinding exhaustion you wear like medals. What's left? Do you even exist without your wounds? Or have you become nothing but the shape of what's hurt you? But listen closer now, because this is where the real revolution begins, where Machiavelli's final law reveals its true face. The man who needs nothing, including his own suffering, becomes untouchable. Not because he's hard, but because he's fluid. Not because he's strong, but because he's surrendered. He's realized that his crown of thorns was never a crown at all. Just a habit he forgot to break. A costume he forgot to remove. A story he kept telling because silence felt too much like death. He's discovered something terrifying and liberating. You can simply put it down. The cross you've been dragging, the wounds you've been nursing, the identity you've built from grief. You can just stop. Not through effort, but through exhaustion. Not through strength, but through a kind of magnificent giving up that looks like giving in but feels like flying. The man who needs nothing doesn't conquer his demons. He stops feeding them. He doesn't overcome his past. He forgets to remember it. He doesn't heal his wounds. He notices they've become boring. And boredom, it turns out, is the most powerful medicine. Your suffering isn't noble. It isn't deep. It isn't even yours. It's just a hand-me-down from every man who came before. Every man who mistook endurance for virtue, who confused pain with purpose, who thought that the only way to matter was to be destroyed in increasingly elaborate ways. Tonight, when you can't sleep, when the ceiling becomes a screen for all your regrets, when your heart pounds out its familiar rhythm of lack, try something revolutionary. Forgive yourself for being happy. Give yourself permission to put down the nails, to take off the crown, to walk away from the cross you carved from your own bones. Discover who you are when you're not performing your pain, when you're not curating your damage, when you're not competing for who can withstand the most. The throne was always yours. You just had to stop kneeling to your own suffering long enough to sit in it. The man who needs nothing, not even his own pain, controls everything, starting with himself.